Let's get started with our first honored guest, the distinguished alumna in curriculum and instruction, Dr. Adrienne Dixson. Dr. Dixson completed her PhD in 2002 in curriculum and instruction. She is the head of the Department of Education Policy Studies at Penn State, a position that she recently began in July. She previously led the Education and Civil Rights Initiative at the University of Kentucky. Her research focuses on social justice and educational equity, particularly through critical race theory and Black feminist theories. She has co-edited influential texts including Critical Race Theory in Education, All God's Children's Got a Song, and the Handbook of Critical Race Theory in Education. Her current work examines educational equity and school reform policies in the urban South with a focus on post-Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans. Dr. Dixson has also served and been on the faculty at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and The Ohio State University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Adrienne Dixson.
Thank you. Oh, good, I get a thing. And I want to say thank you all to everyone, especially the staff, Sean's team, for the wonderful accommodations and the planning. It's been seamless. I feel like a star. And the gift basket, I knew it was going to be cheese, but it's good cheese, and I'm happy to get cheese. But you know, Wisconsin, it's like, okay, it's going to be cheese, but it's good cheese. So I'm happy to be here and really honored. I had no idea that I had been nominated, so this is truly a surprise and an honor, and I feel very grateful to have been considered by peers and colleagues. And I want to say that I also want to hire Sean to be my hype man, because let me tell you, I feel like he's like, I am so excited. I was like, okay, I'm excited too, Sean. This is going to be great. So I do appreciate having Sean, and I'm going to have him on the side as my hype man. So the charge test was to kind of talk about how how the School of Education has impacted us, and a mention of to talk a little bit about the notion of the Wisconsin idea. So I am the new department head of Educational Policy Studies at Penn State. I'm new to the role, it's not a new job. But one of my colleagues is Maria Lewis, who's an alumna of Wisconsin, and she and I were talking about just the differences of being a faculty member and being in the Big Ten and going from Wisconsin to Penn State, and just the differences that we noticed. And at the same time, we talked about this idea of the Wisconsin idea and how we carry that with us. And I've been to many institutions, and I have tried to live out and infect my colleagues with this notion of education should have an impact on folks beyond just the classroom, that it is our duty to serve our community with what we know and how we use our knowledge. And so that has been really profoundly important to me. And so we kind of talked about that. And it made me think about kind of how this notion of the Wisconsin idea is something that I live. And as a student, what I observed from my professors and my colleagues. So a lot of my collaborators are my classmates, because we are, as we say, mission aligned. We share a commitment to this notion of the Wisconsin idea. And so given my kind of perspective as a person of faith, it was this notion of the Word made flesh, that how do I live this idea of how do I live with the Wisconsin idea? So that's the title, where the title comes from. I'm trying to be fancy. Now, Gloria Ladson was my doctoral advisor, and you know, she's high tech. I'm medium tech. I'm trying to get there. So we'll see how this goes. How do I make it go? What I want. Okay. So I started here in 1998. 1990, was it 1998? Yes. From New Orleans, coming from New Orleans, all the way up to Wisconsin, which I had never really, what I knew about Wisconsin was from Laverne and Shirley. And the ale and the beer place, the beer factory that they worked at. So I didn't really know much about Wisconsin. I had never really heard about Madison. And I'm bringing my two young boys, my two young black boys in tow, and we're walking to the teacher ed building to meet Gloria. All I knew about Gloria was her research. I had stalked her at AERA. And I had learned that sometimes what people write about is not what they be about. So I was a little apprehensive, and I'm walking up to the building, I'm getting up to the floor, and I know where her suite is, and I hear Al Green. And I said, all right, we gonna be all right. We gonna be all right. And it's important, and as a faculty member, I talk to my dean as a department chair, when we think about recruiting faculty of color to these places, there has to be something that resonates. And not only was she listening to Al Green, but this is back in '98. The Tom Joyner Morning Show was on her computer. She was listening to Tom. I was like, all right. Okay, so that resonated. And it's important because I could see myself as a black woman in a place that was one of my sons, I was sharing with I think it was Lima or Nancy this morning, that the boys strongly identified as New Orleans. They were New Orleanians. And what they noticed is when we would leave New Orleans and travel, my oldest son, Jordan, said, Mom, it gets whiter and whiter the closer we get to Madison. And so to have someone who embodied an identity and cultural practices that resonated was very important to me, but also to my children, who still think of Gloria as their grandma. And she treats them that way. They're spoiled. So I can't say a word against them because she's always defending them. So it was important to walk into this building and then to feel that I would be seen. And so the two ideologies that have shaped me since leaving Wisconsin and as I was there, because I saw it embodied, not just in Gloria, but in Carl, in Bill Tate. It was, again, you can see yourself in these folks and they see themselves in you, and that's incredibly important. So this notion of the Wisconsin idea from Van Hise, how the research has to move beyond and serve the broader state. He was talking about Wisconsin, but we understand this in a broader perspective. And then the Khalil Gibran's piece about a teacher, if they are indeed wise, he does not bid you to enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your mind. And I think that encapsulates kind of the training as a scholar and as a doctoral student here. It wasn't to make me in the image of Gloria or in the image of Carl, but to pull out what I knew and to connect me to a larger body of knowledge and a way of thinking, but to not lose myself as I became this scholar. And so I've carried that with me, and I think of my kind of training here as kind of an apprenticeship into the professoriate, surrounded by scholars who cared about what I already knew and wanted me to refine what I could be. So in my work, most recently, I've always kind of thought about how does my work then serve the broader public? How do we take what we know, the knowledge that I glean, the insight that I have on the research, and then share it outwardly and inform people who are most impacted by the experiences that I'm just studying. So at the Center for Education and Civil Rights Initiative, we hosted a number of webinars. My predecessor, the director, was a lawyer by training, and so he thought of the work as compliance. So he did a lot of work with districts, but it was mostly around complying. My interpretation of it was, again, to take the knowledge of education, civil rights, and equity, and to make it accessible to a broader public, in particular in Kentucky, where there are histories and contentions and challenges that they have to wrestle with in ways that I had not had to think about because I didn't live in that place. So it's very local and regional. And so because I have a deep bench of scholars that I can pull from, Carl so graciously was one of our panelists, Gloria, and then Tondika Chapman, who was my classmate at Wisconsin. But we had another, Chris Saldana was one of our panelists. when we thought about this, how it impacts higher education. So I've been able to call on colleagues that I know to host these webinars, and that was kind of a hallmark for us, was to have host webinars for teachers, and we did it in the evening, and I'll say people were very gracious at giving their time after school to do that. And then Kevin, who we call him Joseph, it's an inside joke, but Kevin, who's my little academic brother, you'll see in a number of my slides, I've called on Kevin a lot, but we share a research interest in New Orleans. And New Orleanians are concerned that the challenges that they've had with public education and the remaking of public education, that people are forgetting about it. As we get further and further away from Katrina, that the disruption of the remaking of public education gets further and further from people's minds. So we wanted to remind folks that not only were schools remade, but there was a displacement of Black teachers who are incredibly important in New Orleans, not just in the schools, but in the making of community, as culture bearers, as griots, as keepers of memory, and the glue of the community. And the Black middle class in particular has been almost decimated because of the loss of Black teachers. So if you think about just Black educators in general, but Black teachers, Black principals who were church members, who led Girl Scout and Boy Scout troops, who were fully in the fabric of the community, and now they're kind of displaced because of this remaking. And Kevin's latest research is looking at kind of how Black teachers have been impacted, even now, almost 20 years since Katrina. And the other panelist is who's a principal who, in the startup of the charter schools, she was a whistleblower who lost her job and has not been able to be employed as a principal. So we wanted to kind of talk about that. I was fortunate, as I've been funded, my research has been funded, to use my research again to think about dissemination beyond just journal articles and conference presentations. So I was generously funded by the Spencer Foundation and had a radio show. There's a Black-owned radio station in New Orleans that's talk radio, and they wanted a show on public education, and so I funded my show. We called it NOLA Ed, Education for Liberation, and the show ran for 4 years, and the idea was to take local educational issues and connect them to a broader conversation, to take broader educational issues and connect them locally. And so you may see, we hosted a webinar on CRT. I would bring in national scholars and have them talk to local people, parents, teachers, et cetera. And so I've tried to, again, broaden. It was a shift for me to go to radio, and actually I love radio. I could leave the academy today if I could get a radio show. But it was a way of reaching the public that was, again, beyond conferences and conference and papers. Kellogg funded me. I found out that I was the first faculty member at Illinois to receive a Kellogg grant that started as $50,000, and they just kept giving me money. I was like, I'll take it. And so by the end of it, I had $200,000 to fund a professional development series for Black teachers in New Orleans. Now, that is important because Black teachers have been displaced in New Orleans, and ironically, this concern was, well, how do we keep them? And my argument is that we aren't actually providing, Black teachers rarely get training that's specific to them. We assume that people are culturally relevant. We assume that they know how to teach in particular communities, but where would they get the professional development that kind of helps them attend to that, and not in a setting where they have to be careful about what they say? So Kellogg very generously funded us to create a community-based professional development, and one of the pieces, I'm trained as a musician, is actually my first degree is in music theory and composition. We added in jazz musicians to do this blending of talking about not only New Orleans history and politics, but the culture. And so we had a musician come in who's actually a teacher, he's a special ed teacher, and we talked about kind of how do you take this rich culture of music and creativity and blend it with teaching in New Orleans. And so that was generously funded by Kellogg, Gloria, Joyce King, Carol Lee, James Anderson, and a community storyteller were our kickoff group. So we had a wonderful kickoff. And then lastly, this is some of our community based research. You'll see, I mean, it looks like, you know, I do work with more people than Gloria and Kevin, but it just so happens that they know a lot of the stuff that I want to share. So we have done some work with Kimberly Crenshaw's CRT Summer School. Gloria, Kevin, and I taught in that. And then we were invited to do a panel. One of my most proudest moments in doing this panel was that one of the ed reformers called us educational terrorists because we were very critical of education reform in New Orleans, and they felt that we were terrorizing them with our scholarship. So I was proud of that. And this was in Dillard, at Dillard University in New Orleans. And then lastly, I'll say what I kind of take with me from the School of Education is not only my connection to my doctoral advisor and other faculty, but deep friendships that are my academic family. And they are collaborators, they are colleagues, but more importantly, they are friends. They have seen my children grow up, and my children know them as their aunts and uncles, and so I'm really proud of those relationships, and I carry that, I carry that with me wherever I go. Again, Kevin infiltrating our breakfast. You know, that's what we call him. I can never just have my moment with Gloria. He has to be there too. Bill Tate, when he was got his investiture as a president at LSU, I was proud to be invited to sit on the dais with him, and it was, I attended Southern University in Baton Rouge, so I told Bill this is huge for me to wear something from LSU, and I went to Southern, but I'll do it. For you, BT, I'll do it. But I thank you for this opportunity. I'm incredibly proud to be a Badger and a Wisconsinite. I came back after I graduated to buy this robe because they didn't have it when we graduated, so you just know I love Wisconsin, and go Badgers.
I'm Lima Berland. I am the chair of Curriculum and Instruction, and I am proud to be here, being in a position to give this award to Adrienne Dixson. Adrienne, you exemplify the excellence of the School of Education, and so it's not just me. We, the department, the school, are so proud to honor you today. And so now we're going to have some time for Q&A.
I was curious about your role now at Penn State. Could you, you said you were quite new at this role. Could you elaborate a bit on what your challenges are or what your goals are there? Either or.
Are you a former faculty member?
No, I worked there in their theater department many decades ago, but not as a faculty member.
So it's interesting being on the other side of things because faculty members don't act right. You can't tell them nothing, they don't want to listen. So it's interesting to be on the other side of it, but I like it a lot. I didn't realize how bossy I am. And so there's a side of me that I'm exploring, this being really bossy, that I like. But but it's a great department. There are actually two. Marsha Modeste is an alumna of ELPA, and then Maria Lewis. So I have two Badgers there that are wonderful to have colleagues there, and then other colleagues at Fuller. I have great colleagues who are at Penn State. So it's different thinking about leadership. On the other side, I describe it as, I think the best leaders curate resources to support faculty to do their best and to give their best, and that's what I kind of think of my role. I'm kind of enforcing rules that had not been enforced before, but that's a little different. I think all universities are challenged with a new budget model, and a lot of faculty are challenged with having to teach undergrads when they didn't have to do that before. And not only teach undergrads, but teach undergrads in an age of AI and post-COVID, where young people are used to just dealing with the screen. And I sympathize. I was sharing with Nancy that I feel like I'm feral. I've been, for the last couple of years, I actually was at NSF. the National Science Foundation, and we were fully remote. So I only worked on Zoom, and now I got to be in front of people. I can't just mute and turn off my screen. I have to be like, don't show that face, Adrienne. You know, like, don't whisper under your breath, they can hear you. So I think young people are challenged, and faculty who are used to just teaching graduate students have to rethink kind of, you know, what that engagement means and what students are demanding from us. They want more relevancy, right? They want their degree to be meaningful. They want to know that it's going to have an impact on the world. And I think faculty are challenged by, you know, we're in a process now of rethinking the names of our renaming courses because, you know, ed policy analysis just is not attractive. Young people aren't really interested in just a course in ed policy analysis. They want to know, what am I going to do with this? So I think those are some of the challenges in figuring out that with fewer resources from traditional sources, right? So, yeah, I think that's some of the challenges. Thank you for asking the question.
Hi, Dr. Dixson. Aydın Bal, I'm a faculty member at UW-Madison. Welcome and congratulations on the award. I'm just wondering about your research is a wonderful blend of denouncing what's wrong, but also you are exploring the possibilities of transformation, change, enacted utopias. So where do you see where we can facilitate, learn from, and support these enacted utopias in education research and our role as education researchers?
Yeah. I think what I'm learning more, and I will say I credit this with being in New Orleans, is the demand from the community to be a part of, to help imagine what it looks like, and to not go in as the person who knows everything, right? So that you have to listen and contribute, but not take over. And that's a lot for, you know, scholars. Like, we're not used to that, right? We're used to being the smart person in the room who can just sit back and tell people, well, this is what I think the real problem is. And then people are living the real problem. Like, you're just an observer. So what can you contribute to help us think about that? And I get asked a lot to do research on a particular topic that in some ways is hard to research it, but okay, I'm gonna do what I can. But it's really thinking through some existing challenges and accessing resources in ways. The Black Teacher Project came out of, we are losing Black teachers in New Orleans. And schools, these are charter schools, people who are not skilled educators didn't know how to keep Black teachers. And I was like, you have to meet them where they are. And with a lot of transplanted young people were coming to New Orleans to teach, but they didn't really understand the culture. And they thought, oh, I'm Black, I can teach Black kids. No, they're everywhere you go. You have Gloria's best advice to me when I left was to be an anthropologist. So wherever I go, I start out as an anthropologist. I have to understand the culture. I have to understand what's important to people. What is the language? What are the practices? What are the beliefs? What do they value? And that's that's what we endeavored to do with these teachers, is to kind of help them understand the culture that they're in. And even for Native New Orleans, that things have changed since Katrina. And we had an influx of young people who were coming from, whose families left because of the hurricane, and they're coming back from Texas or Utah or Indianapolis or Cincinnati. And they were young enough that they don't have necessarily a cultural memory of New Orleans. They're new, right? And so there are some blending and crossing of borders that we have to help teachers kind of understand. So it's always being open to listening to what the people tell you they need and working with them with that.
Given the project that you had in New Orleans, which could really serve as a model for school districts around the country, and particularly for school districts that are in states that are really dealing with the backlash and talking about CRT. Louisiana is one of those states. And my home state of Texas is one of those states. But also, how do you really began to see how this can serve as a model to counteract some of those moves. And also at the same time, that will invigorate teachers, which will also have an impact on their students.
Yeah. I think Louisiana is an interesting case because of the political context, and it is a historically deeply red state. It was purple for a little while, but it's very red now, with a governor who is, and I don't really mean to offend people, but also I don't kind of care. He's worse than DeSantis, if you can imagine. I couldn't imagine there was anybody worse than DeSantis, but Landry is the worst of the worst, and extreme in every measure. So I don't know, we actually don't know what's possible in Louisiana because literally every day there's something new. So I think it's, political organizing. I work with a group that does political education, which is different than voter education. We've put a lot of energy around getting people to vote, but what are they voting for? And it's really educating people on understanding the political context, and then how do you work against, how do you mobilize, how do you coalesce? And so that's what we're dealing with now. I mean, actually, honestly, education is one of the lowest priority issue now. It's really getting folks mobilized politically, and again, not to vote, but to understand the political context. And then what does voting look like once you have a citizenry who understands the role of politics and their own kind of power in activating change and demanding change, and what does that look like? So the educational issues are playing kind of taking a back seat to other issues that are more pressing. It's just, living, being able to live, being able to pay bills, being able to work and earn a wage, a living wage. So, yeah.
We have time for one more. Lisa?
Yeah, you are a great hype man. Thank you for your talk. I was struck by the Wisconsin idea and your title and threaded throughout your work, and I wanted to make space for you to offer any advice for the folks here. So we have like graduate students, folks who are in the apprenticeship to the professoriate, folks who are staff and leaders and faculty. Like, what advice do you have for carving out space for the Wisconsin idea?
Yeah. I almost think it's our mandate as scholars. So I have a doctoral student that I'm working with, and we have a paper that was accepted with minor revisions, and we're talking about this idea of being a prophetic witness and a scholar as a prophetic witness, which means that we see things, and it's our duty to say it, to name it, and to make people aware of what we see and what we understand, and then we work in community to do that. I think it's a mandate, it's not an option. I've been everywhere I've gone, and Gloria and Bill always reminded me that I will never find a place like Wisconsin, and that's true. That where faculty, even if they weren't trained at Wisconsin, people become very quickly mission aligned, right? That this idea, I think it draws people who believe in the importance and the power of research to impact the world in a positive way. And those who don't believe it leave quickly because it's not a place for you, right? And so I think for students who are here, you should see it. Ideally, you will see it manifested in the work of your professors, in their relationship for the School of Ed, in our relationship to the public, to public schools, to families, to communities, that this should just be how you are. It becomes the Word made flesh. It is in you, and you don't have to think about how do you make it happen. You will make it happen because that's the ethos that you work from. So for me, it was, Gloria always said, you find a job where you can do your work, which is why I have so many new jobs. Because I have to be able to do my work, right? And I have carried Wisconsin everywhere I've gone, and to the extent that I can't live out the Wisconsin idea, I need to go somewhere else. and that's okay. And so I've been at NC State, Ohio State, Illinois, Kentucky. This is my fifth place. And I joke and say, where will I go next in the Big Ten? But, you know, I will go to the next job if I need to, if I can't do my work. And my work is to make the word flesh, to live out the Wisconsin idea.
On behalf of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, I am thrilled to honor Dr. Adrienne Dixson, a true champion of educational equity. As a former executive director of the Education and Civil Rights Initiative at the University of Kentucky, Dr. Dixson led the first program in the Southeastern Conference that viewed education as a civil right. Dr. Dixson, I should have asked you to come up here before I started speaking, so that people were looking at you and not me. Her groundbreaking research explores how race, class, and gender intersect in urban schools, particularly in the urban South, like post-Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans. By integrating critical race theory and Black feminist theories, Dr. Dixson has become a leading voice in the fight for justice in education. She has co-edited some of the most influential books in this field and has been recognized as one of the top education scholars in the country. Now, she is also helping to shape the future of STEM education and racial equity. Dr. Dixson, thank you for your contributions to the field and community and for carrying forth the Wisconsin idea everywhere you go. The School of Education is pleased to present you with the 2024 Distinguished Alum from Curriculum and Instruction.
Thank you.